So first question, what's your 30-day plan if you are elected as mayor?
Well, you know, first of all, the one thing I want to make clear is that the number one strategic priority that I have for the city is to basically I want Colorado Springs to be the safest city in the nation. So we're going to be looking at coming up with a plan to look at our budget and how do we realign that? How are we actually going to achieve those goals and objectives? Because, you know, we're heading into some difficult times, and I think that Colorado Springs needs to become leaner and more efficient. So we're going to be looking at programs, all of them, and try to determine, well, what programs can be privatized, because what I want to be able to do is reallocate additional funding to be able to invest in core services, primarily focusing on public safety, and fix our roads. You talk about our infrastructure. We grew up around here, and I'm telling you, people are frustrated about our roads. We got to get it done.
So you mentioned challenging times ahead. What do you see the big challenges in Colorado Springs?
Well, when you're looking at globally, nationally, the economic pressure is real. When you're looking at our inflation, when you're looking at interest rates, the economy is slowing down. I think these are things that we actually need to be proactive in planning ahead. Global supply chain issues are going to have a huge impact. The shortage of workers, those types of things, when you're looking at what should we be doing at a local level, I want to be able to make sure that we are sustainable as a community to be able to address some of the challenges ahead of us.
And how would you do that? Do you have, at least with economics?
Well, I think that we are way too reliant on federal and state funding. I want us to be able to, when we start looking at our budget, what can we do here locally? Because when you start having to rely on the federal government, look, federal government is $31 trillion in debt. And I think that we need to stop looking at how do we rely on federal funding and state funding. What are the core services that we should be doing? You know, I look at it almost like a football game. When you start thinking about teams that win in the playoffs, the teams that win in the playoff actually focus in on blocking and tackling. We need to get back to the basics. Our government is way too big with regard to we're trying to be all things to all people. We need to get back to our core infrastructure. We need to get back to public safety. People are very concerned about whether or not we have actually enough water to be able to sustain us in the future. And looking at our government regulations, I want to make sure that Colorado Springs, when we're looking at government regulations, whether we're business friendly, whether we're protecting personal property rights, are we having the smallest footprint in your life? I think we need to focus more on customer service because we've gotten away from that.
Got you. So speaking of the water, what was your reaction to the water ordinance that's been passed? I know a lot of people have opinions on it.
Yeah. Number one, we do have to have a standard for water. I think that when you initially heard the discussion of, well, it's 130% or 128, number one, it was like, okay, what discussion happened when it went from 130 to 128? Because I don't think that a lot of people in the community really have a good sense of what should the appropriate standard be. What I want to do is make sure we do have a standard. We have an objective standard that people can rely on that actually plans for us to be able to have the adequate water supply. But what I also want to attach to it is looking at our public safety. Because what you're seeing is, you drive around this community, you see a lot of apartments being thrown up. People are frustrated. They think that we're growing way too fast. But we also are having a huge crime problem. So what good is building a home? What good is building apartments if we don't have enough adequate public safety with regards to the cops and firefighters to be able to respond to that? Those two things have to be linked together. Our code has to be based on that. And as we're making decisions on how we develop, and especially whether or not we're going to annex anything else, there should be a standard that the community is comfortable with. And I don't think we have achieved that yet, but I'm going to hold us accountable to that.
Okay, perfect. And obviously one of the other top priorities is homelessness. How do you plan to tackle this issue?
It's a community issue. We need to stop thinking that it's just a public safety issue. My wife and I have had, we've worked with an individual for over 2 years where we've helped transition him from homelessness to where he actually has a place where he's living right now. And so we learned a lot during that process. And one of the things that I want to focus in on, what's actually the city's role in that? And when I'm looking at what the city's role needs to be, it's really more from an intake perspective of there's a lot of violent crimes that are happening. There's a lot of drug, mental health issues, public safety response needed in those particular areas. So we need to make sure that we have a team that's actually out there to be able to do that initial assessment, deal with the situation that's there. But what we have to do a better job at as a community is making sure that we have what I call a transition, a smooth transition into the private sector, whether it's a faith-based organization, private sector community, other nonprofits, you name it, we have to have a pre-existing relationship with people that might be able to provide housing, might be able to provide financial assistance, so that when we deal with this individual, we actually have a place for them. And this is why I'm saying it's a community effort, and we really need to actually stand up with that. But we also need to enforce the rules that are on the books right now. I think that we aren't doing a good job with that. There's a lot of frustration that's out there, and I think that that's a key part of it too.
Perfect. So I was going to ask what your view is on holding the police chief and his department accountable. 3 of the top 5 lawsuits against the city of Colorado Springs have been because of excessive force by police officers. Do you plan to hold police accountable, or are you planning to work with police in any regard to that?
Oh, I think accountability rests both ways. I grew up here. I know what it's like. I know what it's like to be a black man driving around in the city. And what I'm trying to tell you is that in this community is not this racist, sexist, homophobic community. There's a responsibility on both sides. As the mayor is absolutely going to hold everybody accountable, whether you're a city employee that's not in law enforcement or one that is. There is a standard of excellence that we're going to be, that's going to be required. I want to make sure we're transparent with our training so people are aware of that. I also want to make sure that I'm going to be out there talking to people about personal responsibility, because I don't think we do enough about that. When we start talking about what's the proper way to interact with law enforcement, I taught that, in school. My parents made sure that I was aware of that at home. We actually talked about that at school. I don't think we talk about that enough, because there has to be respect both ways. And so what I'm going to do is have a very high standard that I'm going to hold everybody to, and I want to make sure that we actually address this issue. And lawsuits happen, that's part of it. But what I want to make sure people understand that if the police have not done anything wrong and it's a personal responsibility issue, I've got their back. And I'm not going to settle lawsuits just for the sake of settling.
Perfect. Do you have anything you want to ask?
Yeah, I did have a couple quick follow-up questions. In regard, you mentioned very quickly in increasing crime rates and stuff. I've heard from a couple community members that, way back when they came to this town, seeing it as their retirement community, that this was going to be the community they could live forever. They're considering moving out of Colorado Springs now. Is that discouraging you to get into the office of mayor, or is that something you look to change?
I want people to actually experience what it was like for me when I grew up, because it has absolutely changed. People are very concerned about our crime. I remember, and growing up, I was able to, at my house, jump on the bus, go to the Citadel Mall, hang out all day long. Trust me, I'm 57 years old, and my mom still probably wouldn't let me do that right now. I kind of joke about that, but it's just not safe anymore. You literally can't park your car in the driveway without fear of your catalytic converter being stolen. Crime problem is real. When you start talking about our homicides, we're the #1 in auto thefts. Things have to change. And that's why I'm going to send a very clear message that if you want to do harm in this community, whether it's to people or property, you're going to get arrested. I'm going to hold people accountable. I think that that's something that we want to do. We want people to come. We want you to come spend money and participate in the quality of life that we have here. But we have to start holding people accountable. So I'm willing to look at our municipal code and be able to look at what can we do to protect property and protect people. But we need to be very serious about it, and I am.
What are some of the challenges you may come into if you become mayor, and how do you plan to tackle those?
Well, I think the challenge that you have is restoring respect both ways, one from a public safety standpoint. because I think that's very important. And I think that when people understand this is going to be a strategic priority, that they're going to understand, well, what does that mean? And what it's going to mean is I want to make sure that whoever's going to be the police chief, I'm going to be out there with them. We have a morale and a recruitment issue. I want our police force to be reflective of what the community looks like. It's a lot easier to have a strong relationship when it comes to law enforcement if the people that are in those positions are actually reflective of the community. I think that's important. We have a major challenge in this state because we remove qualified immunity. I'm absolutely opposed to that. You have a lot of police officers who are like, look, I put my whole career in this and I'm risking my livelihood just for doing my job. But I also want to hold elected officials accountable that are passing bad legislation. I tell them, I'm going to be your worst nightmare. I don't care what party you're in. You could be a red party, blue party, green party. I'm going to be your worst nightmare if you're promoting legislation that's creating an incentive for people to commit crimes. That has to stop. The other biggest challenge is look around. People are frustrated about growth in this community. This election is being bought and paid for by two major developers. And when you're looking at your TV and you're looking at the candidates are always on TV, all you have to do is go into their campaign finance and see how much money is being poured into their campaign. They want to continue to develop, and I think people in this election cycle are fed up, and I hope they are. And that's why when you're looking at there isn't a big ballot return, I think people are really weighing the option. Do we want to continue things the way they are? And I'm saying no. I'm standing up. I want to fight for this community. I want to stand up and be like, no, we don't have to develop every square inch of this community. We need to have a standard that we're going to hold people to. We want to make sure that there's enough water to be able to provide for this growth. And that's why it's so important. Take a stand in this election. This election is trying to be bought and paid for, and I want the community to say no.
My last question I had for you is just in terms of leadership, obviously with your resume, if you call it, in the city, commissioner, with the Air Force, just why is that important to you and how do you look to bring that into the mayor's office?
I like to look at the fact that when you start off, my political career started off in 8th grade. And I came home and I told my mom that I wanted to run for class president. And she could have ended my career right now. She could have broke my little heart and been like, no, I'm sorry, you can't do it. But God placed so many people in my life. And I tried to get off track. But God placed people in my life at the perfect time. And these people represent every shape, walk of life in this community. That's why I'm so passionate about, I love this community because it is absolutely, you can achieve the American dream. We are not this racist, sexist, homophobic community that we're trying to be labeled. So many people helped me get to this point in life. And it's about working hard. It's about those community relations. I'm running to say thank you. I'm running to give back. I'm running to stand up for people that absolutely want to do something about this community, and they're fed up because they believe that, look, the builders or everybody are basically bought and paid for this election and we might as well not vote. I'm here to say my loyalty is to you. I'm going to be a mayor for everybody, whether you're a single mom or a CEO. Everybody's going to have a fair shot. So I need you to believe that we can blend. Believe that we can change things and believe that together we can make Colorado Springs the safest city in the nation and we can actually create this community the way we had envisioned it.